Good to see everybody this morning. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here, and of course we're always thankful when we can worship God and have an opportunity to study a portion of His Word. This morning's lesson, I guess in some ways, relates back to some of what we talked about last week. If you recall, on this past Sunday morning, we spent some time looking at some things related to the observance of the Christmas holiday. And we'd made several points throughout that sermon, different things that are good for us to think about. And towards the end, I had made a comment about the wise men. We have the record there in the Gospels of how wise men came a great distance to bring gifts to the newborn King. And I seem to recall anyway that I had made a brief comment there that there's another lesson just in that image alone, that story. And I thought more about that over the course of the week, and I thought it would be good for us to explore that a little bit. Matthew chapter 2, we're not going to read the entire record of the story of the wise men here, but I wanted to just look at verses 10 and 11, which record their arrival to where Jesus was, and then, of course, the gifts that they brought to him. It says there in verse 10, when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they come into the house, they saw the young child and Mary his mother, and they fell down and they worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The title of our lesson this morning is, What Hast Thou Brought to Me? This past week, at some point or another, most of us probably got together with family. If we haven't done that, maybe we're planning to this coming week, depending on schedules and things. But I think most of us have that custom, that tradition to get together and exchange gifts. I want us to think this morning about the gifts that Jesus has brought to us. And then I want us to think in reverse about what we have brought to him. Or what are we bringing to him? I guess is another way we could think about that question. We see these men who are described as wise men. As they recognize the newborn king, they feel compelled to bear gifts unto him. And so as we recognize and think about what Jesus has done for us, I think it's an important question, likewise, if we are to be considered wise, to think about what we are offering each day to our King. One of the hymns that we sing, and in fact I think Ian has designated this song as our invitation song today, which is fitting, and so I appreciate him doing that. I'm not going to read the entirety of the hymn, but I just wanted us to notice especially a portion of the verses, where this is a hymn that is penned from the standpoint, or I should say the viewpoint of Christ, as he would be speaking to us and talking about everything that he has done on our behalf, and then of course asking the question to us about what we have done or what we are doing in response to that. But it reads, I gave my life for thee, my precious blood I shed, that thou might ransomed be and raised up from the dead. And there, of course, we think about the spiritual resurrection coming out of the death of sin through his blood, and of course the future glory that awaits those who are faithful. It goes on and Again, think about this in terms of Jesus speaking to us. He says, "My Father's house of light, my glory-circled throne, I left for earthly night, for wanderings sad and lone." There's another song that we sing from time to time, "Out of the Ivory Palaces," which really focuses on that thought alone, this idea of what Jesus left behind to come here and serve us. "I suffered much for thee, more than thy tongue can tell, of bitterest agony, to rescue thee from hell. And I have brought to thee down from my home above salvation full and free, my pardon and my love." And so as the chorus for the end of each of those verses reads in the song, it's, "What have you done? As I have left all these things for you, what have you left behind for me? Have I brought these gifts to you? What have you brought to me?" etc. is the thought. There are several verses that we could go to that bring to mind what Jesus has done for us, all that has been made available to us because of his selflessness, because of his love. But I thought we would read Isaiah 53, verses 4 through 6. There, Isaiah, as he pens these prophetic words about the Messiah, he says, "Surely he has borne our griefs. He has carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." And so as we progress now throughout the rest of the lesson, we're going to focus on the fact that Christ deserves our best. It's one thing you think about a job you might have where you go and you do what's expected and you kind of get by, you get your paycheck, etc. But it's another thing to go each day with the attitude of, I'm not just going to do, the bare minimum to get by, but I'm actually going to go into this job or this task or whatever it is. Maybe we even think about when we're in school and we think about a certain test we have to take or a certain subject we're trying to learn. It's one thing to just learn the basic facts enough to pass the test. It's another thing to really pour ourselves into it and say, I'm just going to do the absolute best that I'm able to do, even though it might not be asked of me to do so. These are two very different things. And I think as we contemplate what Jesus has done, how can we reach any other conclusion than he deserves that kind of a mentality? I guess to inject just a brief moment of humor, you think about those infomercials that used to be on TV. You remember Billy Mays? And he would get on those infomercials and he'd be so enthusiastic about the product. And OxyClean, I think, is one of his main products that he would sell. He's since passed away. But you think about those gifts that the wise men brought to Jesus. And I think we need to have, a Billy Mays attitude about what we're bringing to Christ, if you will. He would say, you've got your gold and you've got your frankincense, but wait, there's myrrh. That's a bad joke, I guess. But the idea there is we're not just going to do the basics. We're going to go beyond. We're going to pour ourselves into this. And this lesson was, I guess as I was putting it together, I really stepped on my toes a lot because, I think about my life up to this point, and I don't feel that I've given Christ my best. But I'm determined to do that. I've been on this earth for 37 years now, and most of you kind of laugh at that and call me a young man. I know you did the other night. But I don't know how much time I have left, but I do know that I don't want to waste a moment of it on things that would bring shame to my Lord. I want to give Him my best. And so I hope that as we think about some specific things here that we'll all be inspired. Again, we're going into a new year, and it's always kind of the cliche thing, I guess, where we think about, well, what's our resolution going to be, right? What are we going to do better this year? So maybe the timing is also significant that way, but these are important things I want us to think about here. Christ deserves the best use of our time. My grandfather's favorite psalm is the first psalm. And the first 3 verses of that psalm, it says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful." And if you notice the language of that first verse, it's interesting. And I'm sure maybe you've heard comment on this before, maybe even by me, I don't know. But you notice there's a progression there. And that's often the way that sin operates in our life, where, at first we're just kind of walking by, but then maybe whatever it is, we kind of stop walking and we start to give a little more attention to whatever it is. And before long, we stood there for so long, we think, well, I might as well sit down and just be comfortable. And that's the way the devil gets us. It starts as just some fleeting temptation that we give a little bit of attention to, but then we start to give it more attention, and then it just keeps sucking us in to the point where now we're just comfortable in this sinful thing. But the psalmist goes on, again, the man who's blessed is not the one who progresses into sinful things, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in His law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does, it shall prosper. You notice the language there. In His law he meditates day and night. And how often do we really allow the Word of God to be present in our thought process? Is it something that's just an occasional thing? Like when we're here together, we think, okay, well now we'll devote some time to thinking about God. Or is it really in everything that we say and do? Every moment of life, do we think about God in some way? Because we really should. Christ deserves that. He deserves the best use of our time, which is to keep Him present in our minds. Paul, back here in Ephesians chapter 5, he writes there in verses 15 and 16, "See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, he says, because the days are evil. And so it's the idea there that we're not wasting our time, we're not allowing it to slip away from us, but that we're utilizing it the best that we can to be thinking about and doing good things. Thinking about how we can glorify Him. Christ deserves our best effort. And this kind of ties in, I guess, with the general concept of what we're talking about. Over here in 2 Timothy chapter 2, in verse 15, Paul, writing to Timothy, tells him to be diligent, to present yourself approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. The word diligent is so important to us as Christians. The word diligence invokes this concept of not just effort that is occasional, but rather effort that is persistent and continual. Maybe you think about the old Energizer bunny, those commercials where, is that bunny ever going to stop moving? Right? Is that battery ever going to run out? And of course, that's the pitch, that's the gimmick of what they're selling. Right? They want you to think that this battery's just going to keep going and going and going. We know all batteries eventually run out. But when you're shopping in the store, you have to admit that those ads sometimes do play into your thinking. You think, well, which brand do I want to buy here? You think about that bunny, you think, well, that's probably the best one to get, right? So marketing is a powerful thing sometimes. But that's the concept. When you think about the word diligence, that's the concept that should come to your mind. Is it's not going to run out. We're not going to go for so long, then say, well, okay, we've done enough. Now we'll just sit down and rest. No, we're going to keep going. The rest is at the end of our lives. That's when we can stop working. You know, sometimes we get the concept, well, now I'm older, right? I've retired from my normal job here on the earth, so I can kind of relax. And well, no, for the Christian, retirement, if you want to think about it that way, is not until we are with God. Once we are out of this earthly tent and are clothed upon with that immortal body that yet awaits. Back here in Hebrews chapter 6, you look at verses 10 through 12 there. And the Hebrew writer says, God is not unjust to forget your work and the labor of love which you've shown toward His name, in that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until the end, that you do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. And you could go a couple chapters over and read through chapter 11, and you could see all kinds of examples of what he's talking about there. Those who kept the faith all the way up until the end, so that they could receive that reward. Christ deserves our worship. Remember that the psalmist there in Psalm 122 and verse 1, he expresses his joy when he thinks about the concept of worshiping God. He says, I was glad when they said to me, let us go unto the house of the Lord. Do we have that kind of joy? When we think about the opportunities that are set aside for us to come together and to devote to the worship of our King and our God, do we get excited about that? When we look out and we see snow falling and we think, oh, they might cancel services tonight. Are we thinking, well, that'd be nice, then I could do some things I want to do? Or do we have the attitude of, well, I really hope they don't cancel? Only you can answer that. I can't answer that for you. But that's a scenario maybe that would help us to think about where we are in our devotion. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 1, sometimes we think about the worship of God as a thing that is distinct to our assemblies. And don't misunderstand, I think that worship is something that we set aside to do. And in other words, I don't feel that we're just in a constant state of worship, if you will. Some would take that position, whereas everything you would say and do, as long as you're living right, that you're in essence worshiping God. I don't necessarily agree with that conclusion. I think that we do set aside time to worship and do certain things that God has commanded us to do in worship to Him. However, there's something to be said about our attitude each moment of life, and I think that's what Paul's speaking to here in Romans 12 and 1. He says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. In the law of Moses, the sacrifice, whatever they were sacrificing, that was at an appointed time, at an appointed place. We're to think about our own selves, our own life, our own bodies, in essence, as a living sacrifice. In other words, every moment of life where we have the opportunity to choose, put it in a personal perspective, I have the ability to choose. Am I going to do what Devin wants to do? Or am I going to sacrifice Devin's will so that I can perform Christ's will? That brings glory to God when I make that decision. The latter, not the former. And likewise when you do that. And that's the way we need to think about it. It's a constant sacrifice of our will for His. In Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 15, similar thought here. Therefore, by Him, let us continually offer, notice, the sacrifice of praise to God, that is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to His name. So in other words, this is not something that we do just on the Lord's Day or on Wednesdays, but we're to continually offer the sacrifice of praise. And again, why is it called a sacrifice? Why is the concept of praise unto God and thankfulness expressed to God talked about as a sacrifice? Well, because we have to sacrifice what we might normally do to make time for that. All these points, they all kind of go together. We're trying to distinguish them and think about them as distinct things, but really they all bleed together. When you go out to eat, or even when you're home, or wherever you are, you're about to eat a meal, do we sacrifice a moment to express thanks to God? Because that's what it is. You're sacrificing your time, or you could just be diving right into that food. You're probably hungry, right? Looks so good, smells good, ready to eat. But let's sacrifice a moment, and let's praise God and thank God. You see how that works? And we're to continually do that. Christ deserves our best commitment. We cannot serve Him 95% of the time and then do our own thing the other 5% of the time. That's not good enough. Now, that might get us by in a secular job or something of that nature where when we look at our overall performance, well, about 5% of the time we were goofing around with our coworkers or we were, daydreaming or whatever. But 95% of the time you did a good job, so that's still an A. You pass, right? But with God, it really has to be 100%. Remember, Jesus said that we can't serve two masters. You can't have a divided allegiance. Let's come back over here to Luke chapter 9 for a moment. Luke 9, verse 23. We'll read down through verse 26 there. Jesus speaking. He says, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself." See how that plays into what we just talked about? We're denying ourselves. We're taking up our cross daily, it says, and we're to follow Him. Whoever desires, he goes on to say, to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world, but is himself destroyed or lost? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, of him the Son of Man will be ashamed when he comes in his own glory, and in his Father's, and of the holy angels. Let's come over here a few pages to John chapter 3. John chapter 3. And let's notice verses 19 through 21 there. Jesus says, "This is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light, does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But the one who practices the truth, he comes to the light that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been wrought in God." I think that Jesus speaks to just a very powerful truth in what he says there. In the daytime, in the light, it's easier, isn't it, to stay committed. But in the darkness, it becomes much easier to let go of his hand and wander to places that we shouldn't be. And what does he mean there by the light and the darkness? Well, he means by when all eyes are on you and all eyes aren't, is kind of another way to think about that. You think about most crimes when they're committed. When do people commit crimes? Do they wait till noon, middle of the day, when the sun is at its brightest, everybody can see what they're doing? Well, no. They wait till there's darkness so that people can't see what they're doing, so they can get away with whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. Why do you think so many evil things are done in, backroom conversations or someplace hidden, out of sight? We must ask ourselves, are we the same person when everyone's around us as we are when we're all by ourselves? And I'll tell you, there's so many different ways that we can, in the world we live in today, get drawn into this deception of darkness. And what I mean by that, I'm talking about, I would hold it up if it wasn't recording the sermon, your cell phone, your computer, the internet. People get to thinking, well, I can do things and no one will know about it. I'll just delete it when I'm done. And it'll be forgotten. And it has no real effect on my real life. Right? It's just some kind of hidden thing. It's not. We always need to remember what we read there in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 13, where, we might fool a lot of people, but everything is open and naked before the eyes of our God. He knows everything. And so maybe this guy's got the best idea here. Maybe sometimes we just need to take the hammer to some of this technology that we have that in a lot of ways is good, but can very easily be abused. Are you the same person here as you are when you're alone with your phone or your computer? Christ deserves your best commitment. Christ deserves men and women of integrity who do the right thing no matter who's around. Christ deserves your love. That'll be the final point this morning. Back here in 1 John, look there in chapter 3. 1 John chapter 3, and let's start in verse 16 there. It says, by this we know love. By what? Because he laid down his life for us. That's the ultimate demonstration of what love is. Selfless sacrifice. Especially for somebody who doesn't deserve such a sacrifice. And what's the response? He goes on, he says, we also ought to lay down our lives for each other, for the brethren. Emulate the example of Christ. Be selfless. Think of others before yourself. Verse 17, whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide? We can talk about that concept of being selfless or thinking about the needs of others, but when it comes right down to it, if we see the opportunity and we don't act on it, well then, wherein is the love that we supposedly have? He says, my little children, let us not love merely in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. Show it. Prove it. In John's Gospel, chapter 14, verse 23, Jesus there said, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and we will make our home with him. I don't know about you, but that's what I want. I want God to be present in my life. I want him to be home where I am, to abide with me. But if that's what I want, then I've got to pay attention to the rest of the verse, don't I? I have to love him, and I have to keep his commandments. I have to demonstrate that I'm devoted to giving the best of my time and energy and worship and commitment to him. So what have you brought? What are you bringing in your life? There's a poem that I had come across, and I kind of dissected it a little bit and rearranged it to fit on the slide here, but we'll read through this and then the lesson will be yours this morning. It reads as follows: I talk with people daily of many subjects rife, but I never mention Jesus nor show him in my life. I never miss a day at work. Perfection's what I seek, but I miss the worship of my God once or twice a week. I spend extra on my family for things I can't afford, but I don't remember ever giving extra to the Lord. When your life on earth is over and they lay you down to rest, how can he say to you, well done, if you've made him second best? Sobering thoughts to conclude with. We're about to sing the invitation song at this time. If there's anyone here who, as a Christian, perhaps needs to rededicate themselves, maybe you've wandered astray, you have not been giving Christ your best, and you need to and want to, in a public way, express that desire and have the prayers and support of your brothers and sisters here, we'd love to support you in that. We all want to support each other in that goal. That should be a goal for each of us. Perhaps you're here and you've never confessed Christ, you've never put him on in baptism, never had your sins cleansed. You can't give him your best until you first become one with him, become a part of his kingdom, his body. And if we can help you in regards to those matters, then likewise we stand ready to assist you this morning. And so whatever the need might be, we would ask that you make it known at this time by coming up to the front.
I gave my life.